For centuries, as ancient empires expanded and borders shifted, millions of people faced a terrible reality. They were hunted down simply for the god they worshipped or the language they spoke. When your identity becomes a crime and you are forced out of your homeland with nothing but the clothes on your back, where on earth do you go? For many of these fleeing groups, the answer lay across the Arabian Sea. Ancient India operated on the principle of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which translates to "the world is one family." This was an inclusive social arrangement. Rulers and local communities provided incoming refugees a safe haven to live, work, and worship, without demanding that they abandon their original heritage to fit in. By granting these groups a permanent role in its social order, India ensured that the skills and traditions they brought with them would eventually build the nation's own future. Jewish migration to India arrived in three distinct waves over thousands of years: early traders around 562 BCE, refugees fleeing the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, and much later, those escaping Baghdad in the 18th and 19th centuries. When that second group of refugees reached the Malabar coast in present-day Kerala, they were taken in by the local Chera rulers and given a dedicated settlement that became known as Jewtown. This was a formal legal arrangement. The ruler Bhaskara Ravi Varma issued copper-plate charters, legally binding royal decrees that guaranteed the community's physical protection and land rights. Because their safety was codified in law, their culture endured for centuries. They built synagogues and practiced their faith openly, insulated from the anti-Semitism then common in Europe and West Asia. By the 19th century, the Baghdadi Jews, most notably the Sassoon family, had settled in Bombay. They used their commercial success to fund massive public works, building hospitals, schools, and even contributing to the construction of the Gateway of India. The legal protection granted to a group of exhausted refugees in the first century laid the groundwork for their descendants to help construct the infrastructure of modern Indian cities. We see a similar pattern with the Syrian Christians. While their earliest ancestors arrived in Kerala alongside St. Thomas the Apostle around 52 CE, the community grew into a significant social force following a much larger wave of refugees in 345 CE. This group, led by Thomas of Cana, crossed the sea specifically to escape the severe religious persecution under the Persian king Shapur II. Once again, the Chera rulers took them in. They recognized the commercial expertise and diplomatic connections these new arrivals possessed, granting them deep social and economic privileges. What followed was a complete cultural synthesis. The community preserved their ancient Syriac Christian liturgy and religious identity, while seamlessly adopting the local Malayalam language, dress, and customs. They embedded themselves into the local economy, driving the global spice trade, and later spearheaded regional developments by opening local schools, colleges, and orphanages. Centuries later, the community remains a centerpiece of Kerala's social fabric, maintaining their ancient liturgy while speaking and dressing as local citizens. In the 7th century, followers of Zoroastrianism fled Persia after the Arab invasion, seeking a place where they wouldn't face forced conversion or religious taxes. They worshipped a supreme god, Ahura Mazda, and placed a heavy emphasis on fire, purity, and the battle between good and evil, concepts that shared deep linguistic and spiritual roots with ancient Indian Vedic traditions. When they landed in Gujarat, local legend says the ruler, Jadi Rana, was hesitant. Since they couldn't speak each other's language, he showed them a jug filled to the brim with milk, signaling that his kingdom was already full. A wise Parsi priest responded by taking a spoonful of sugar and stirring it into the milk without spilling a single drop. It was a promise. They would blend in and sweeten the society without overflowing it. They kept that promise. This small group of refugees integrated peacefully, and over the centuries, they grew to become the primary engine behind the Indian Industrial Revolution. Parsi families like the Tatas laid the foundation for India's iron, steel, and nuclear science programs, while innovators like Ardeshir Godrej revolutionized manufacturing with modern, affordable security locks. The descendants of displaced refugees who arrived on the coast with nothing but a sacred fire ended up forging the literal steel and infrastructure of modern India. For the Jews, the Syrian Christians, and the Parsis, Finding refuge meant integration, but it never required them to abandon their heritage. They were allowed to keep their Saturday Sabbaths, their ancient Syriac liturgy, and their sacred eternal fires, while still participating fully in the wider society. Today, that legacy is visible in the technological industries, the educational institutions, and the historic architecture lining the streets of Mumbai and Kochi. These modern developments trace directly back to the men and women who arrived on these shores seeking a safe haven centuries ago. India's history reveals hospitality as a pragmatic act of state building. By protecting the vulnerable, the nation secured the architects, scientists, and traders who would eventually build its modern foundations.